Item number 4, presentations. We're going to receive a presentation from James Porter of the County Department of Public Works on what they are doing to avoid overflows at Cupid Row.
Thank you, Mayor Ruane, members of the council. My name is Jim Porter. I'm the Director of Public Works with San Mateo County. We oversee the San Bruno Flood Control Channel, which is the topic of tonight's presentation. I'm going to talk a bit about the history of the flood control district, its revenue sources, and then we'll drill down to Cupid Row and talk about some of the issues that are going on there and some of the challenges we face in maintaining that channel. The San Bruno Flood Control Zone, which this channel is in, was established in 1967. At that time, it was designed to handle what's called a 25-year storm, or something that in theory, statistically, is supposed to occur once every 25 years. Practically, that happens a whole lot lately. The zone itself consists of several segments. One is the Cupid Row segment, which we'll talk about a lot today. Another, and that runs from basically the Caltrain tracks up to San Bruno Avenue. Then there's the North Channel, and that's a section from San Bruno Avenue that runs north of there, underneath 101-380 interchange, and out to the bay. We also have tide gates at the bay where it enters the bay. And then we have two pump stations. We call them the Angus Pump Station and the Walnut Pump Station. And they pump water out of the eastern portion of San Bruno into that channel. This is a picture of the zone. You can see it encompasses primarily the city of San Bruno. There is a portion of South San Francisco in this zone. This is a little bit confusing, but what you want to take out of this picture is this is the design for the 25-year storm. The wider channel is what the actual design cross-section was built to in 1968, and what we've been trying to maintain to over those years. So the zone receives funding from a portion of the 1% of property tax. The zone was created prior to Prop 13, and the revenue we receive is a portion of that 1%. It's about $195,000 per year. In the last 10 years, we've spent about $90,000 on maintenance, so that leaves roughly $100,000 a year that we're saving up for capital. And as you'll see, the capital projects are very expensive for this type of work. The last time we did a major dredging project, it was roughly $500,000. And the cost of that is primarily the permitting and the biological work that we do because of the presence of the San Francisco garter snake and the red-legged frog in that channel. We've also looked at upgrading the two pump stations, the Angus and the Walnut pump station. For us to upgrade those stations, both of them, we're looking at about $2.5 million. And for us to replace those stations, we're in somewhere of the range of $11 million. So as you can see, the cost of capital versus the revenue is disproportionate. There's a lot more capital needs than we have the dollars for. As I mentioned earlier, we do have a sensitive habitat that we're working in. This entire channel is within what's called the West of Bayshore property that's actually owned by the San Francisco International Airport. The city and county of San Francisco owns that land. Somewhere along the line, we inherited that channel without an easement. So we're hoping to get an easement someday, but technically this all belongs to the city and county of San Francisco. And as I mentioned, the channel runs east-west and then north-south up to the bay. This is really the meat of what we want to talk about. Prior to 2000, maintenance for us was fairly easy. We would go in annually or as needed, come in with heavy equipment and take out the sediment and take out the vegetation. We'd also maintain the access road. Right about 2000, 2002 timeframe, BART came in and they extended their tracks down to Millbrae. When that project came in, everything changed. The channel that went from San Bruno was realigned under and through the BART tracks to get to the east-west segment. But what really occurred at that time was a higher awareness of the endangered species in that area. As I show up here, we weren't allowed to do any maintenance in that area between 2000 and 2002. This is an example of the maintenance road that was affected by the BART construction. We say in our slide that it was lowered. It was actually, the lowering was done by the heavy equipment that was placed out there, and as I said, we couldn't get out there to maintain it. So sandbags were placed along the edge of the channel And in 2002, we had some overtopping at that time. So after Bart left, we applied for maintenance permits. And now we're in a new regulatory environment. We're able to get one-time permits to clear vegetation and sediment. When we did that in 2003, that cost us about $535,000. And as I said, the primary cost is our biologists. When we go in there and work, we're either hand-cutting vegetation, or when we dig out sediment, we have a biologist standing next to the excavator, looking at that bucket, looking at it go in the truck, and making sure that there's no frogs or snakes in there. As you can imagine, the labor costs on these jobs get pretty expensive. After that, from 2004 to 2008, we received permits to go in and hand cut. And then we began working with the San Francisco International Airport to look at how we can work in this area but still maintain the habitat for the red-legged frog and the San Francisco garter snake. So we're constantly facing this battle of trying to preserve the habitat for these species while trying to maintain flood control. And what came out of those discussions was that the airport developed it's called a recovery action plan. And the purpose of the recovery action plan was to increase the population of the garter snake as well as the red-legged frog. And the intent was to increase those populations so that when they're thriving, we will be more likely to be able to get in and do the work that we need because those populations are less affected. As you can see, we're dealing with several different agencies when we get permitting. And at times, these agencies have different comments on their permits that are sometimes in opposition to those agencies that have given us other comments. So it becomes a little bit difficult to work sometimes. But this plan was approved in 2008, and it's to be implemented in 3 phases. So a big portion of this plan, the phase 1 plan, was to deal with the east-west part of the channel. And what the RAP suggested was to cut out scalloped areas or widen the channel in certain areas to provide a wet habitat so the frogs and snakes can breed and flourish in those areas. So that RAP was implemented in 2008. During that period, or actually that construction was implemented in 2008. During that period, we continued to work on the north-south channel by hand-cutting vegetation. But one of the conditions of that permit for the RAP was that we could do no maintenance in the east-west segment. So as you can imagine, vegetation began to flourish in that area. I'm going to go through a series of slides that shows exactly what happened. On the left side, you'll see the condition of the channel in 2008, and I apologize for the shadows, but that's all we've got. On the right side, you'll see this condition of the channel in 2009, and you can see those scallops carved out of there. Well, over time, in 2010, you start seeing the vegetation really begin to take over. In 2011, it gets worse, and in 2012, it's to a point where we're really restricting our capacity in that channel. So fast forward to December 2nd, 2012, we had a series of storms that went through from Wednesday through Sunday, and there was a significant amount of water that dumped during that period. We've checked and found that there was roughly 3.7 inches of rain that fell during that roughly 5-day period. And what happened was we had some overtopping of that channel. Now, the overtopping, from what we can tell, occurred because of the dense cattails that are right next to the area where it overtopped. From what we can tell, the flow came down that channel, debris and water hit those cattails, and it overtopped at that location. So that is the reason why that happened. Now, what we've done since then is work collaboratively with San Francisco International Airport to try to get some emergency permits to get in there. We are attempting to get permits from Fish and Wildlife, that's a federal agency, and Fish and Game, which is a state agency, to go in there within the next week or two and cut down those cattails so that we don't have that obstruction. I learned today that one of the 2 agencies has approved our emergency permit to go in. We haven't heard from the other agency yet, but we are going to attempt to get in there. We're hoping this weekend. We're going to continue to push the other agency to try to get in there. Phase 2 of the RAP is going to involve continuing this along the north-south segment of this channel. But what we're going to try to suggest and get approval for in this Phase 2 part of the project is to be able to do sediment removal on that east-west segment along with vegetation removal. So in terms of long-term for this channel, as I mentioned, it is a very difficult area to work. We have very little revenues, and we've got a tough regulatory environment. And we've got a channel that was designed for a 25-year storm, which over the years, we've seen 25-year storms more often. So what we would like to do, or what we need to do in the future, is to upgrade both of our pump stations to continue the channel maintenance in that area. We also need to upgrade the floodgates out at San Francisco Bay to keep saltwater intrusion from working its way in. And I think most importantly, we'd like to work with your city and your staff to identify additional revenue sources so that we can make these capital projects happen. The 1%, the portion of the 1% that we're getting is simply inadequate to do some of the work that we need to do. So over the long term, we're going to need to look at various other methods of getting revenue. And there's several options available. We operate another flood control district where we've done some bonding. They have a larger revenue stream, but we can talk about that in the future. And that really concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Good. Council have any questions of Mr. Porter? Mr. Rico?
Yes, I just had one question. Could you maybe explain a little bit?
Right into the mic, Mr. Rico. Thank you.
Robert Rico, 7th Avenue. Could you explain a little bit the tide gates and how they are affected by high and low tides? And does that restrict water under certain conditions from flowing into the bay and therefore backing up? Thank you.
Sure, in addressing that question, the purpose of the tide gates are to inhibit saltwater, essentially the bay, from getting into the channel during high tides. But the flap gates open when there's a high flow, so that the way that they're designed is when you get pressure from the water that's coming from the channel, it'll open the tide gates and the water will flow in. When you have low flow situations but a high tide, it keeps the water from going up into the channel. The trick is when the tide's up and the water's flowing in, if they're at a very close elevation, you will get a little bit of resistance from the water from San Bruno flood control channel going out into the bay. At that portion of the channel itself, though, we have a little bit more capacity to hold the water. So it's not as influenced up at the Cupid Row area, but that's the way that that's the way the design is intended to work.
Good. Any other questions? Well, thank you for your presentation. I understand the dilemma you're faced with you know, the lack of funds, but the work that has to be done. But of course, the third leg of that is the protection of the snakes and the frogs. And you know, my real concern is the protection of the residents in the lower part of San Bruno, because I saw some of those pictures, and we have to find a better balance here, because it sounds like a lot of those snakes and frogs could move over to Sharps Park. They're going to redo a lot of that habitat, so maybe we can dredge some stuff a little quicker and really put the concentration on the people that are actually paying to do the dredging. So thank you very much.
We'll do our best. Thank you.